All right, is this on? Y'all hear me? Great. Okay. Oh, what a beautiful evening. Great evening to, oh, by the way, what happened this morning? The sun rose, right? And then it set. A little dovetail into what we've been talking about, the Ecclesiastes, right? So just seeing if you remember the theme or some of the concepts of Ecclesiastes under the sun, and how the sun is on this continuous cycle. So there's a couple different lessons there for the sun for us to recall here. Some other things to remember about Ecclesiastes. This is a sermon written by a preacher, and that preacher being Solomon. And the first section that we read was its introduction. The first 11 verses of chapter 1 is an introduction that is set us up. And see, who can remember? If you're to describe the tone of the first 11 verses, what would you say it is? Is this an upbeat sermon? Gloomy sermon? Yeah, it's a gloomy sermon, right? It's a very pessimistic view, and the theme of this is vanity. It's everything is vanity, right? And so he spends these first 11 verses. Where did my first page go? There it is. Okay. He spent that first 11 verses talking about, all the reasons why, from a secular perspective, why the world is so depressing, why it's just life and is inherently depressing. And so we went through, we're going to have to skip through these slides here. All right, let's see. There we go. We talked about some key words and phrases. Oh, I forgot to say, Justin even told me I should say this, but I forgot. Where's that handout? There. If you did not pick one up, this is a copy of the outline for the first two lessons. So last week's lesson and this week's lesson. So if you didn't pick one up, they're out there in the foyer. And anyway, it's going to follow along what we're studying here. Oh yeah, just another reminder, again, this material is also accessible online. Denny Petrillo is the author of a lot of the material that I'm using to assist in our study. You can go onto YouTube, and if you go to the Bear Valley Bible Institute, you can find a series of YouTube videos that goes through all this. So highly encourage you to check it out. I also found that you can also get this content in the World Video Bible School. But you'll see a much younger version of Denny in those videos. So I actually checked that out the other day, and I was like, whoa, that guy looks a little different. But actually, it's highly encourage it because, even though the material is the same, it presents it a little different way. You might pick up some new things. And so between like these three different things, it'll help reinforce what you learn here in this class. Okay. All right, so back to this. We went through key words and phrases, and the recommendation here is to take the time to look at the words that have high frequency in the text. And highly encourage you to spend some time going through and highlighting these words in your Bible. If you're not comfortable with that, print it out and do it do it that way. That's actually what I have been doing. I think Justin's been doing the same thing, and some others you may have been, and maybe you have some other techniques in doing it if you don't feel comfortable with that, or you want more space to write things down. It's a great way for you to start to recognize where these words are popping up. And that's going to come into we'll use that as an example. One word you'll see as evident. We're going to look at the word God. and where the word God shows up and doesn't show up, because that is a clue to how this book is structured. But you can see with these keywords, you can tell what where the focus is. And then we talked about a thesis. Oh, I forgot to change the spelling, right? This is the thesis statement that you can look at. A series of lessons given to convince man that striving for wisdom, knowledge, and wealth through labor makes one a fool, because he is seeking, his heart is inclined, for that which is vanity and striving after wind. This being the theme based on, again, how prevalent some of these words are. We talked about under the sun, and basically Solomon's way of saying everywhere. It's true for everyone. It's like a universal truth. And then we talked about an outline. There's an introduction in the first couple chapters, and then verse 24 is a pivotal transition verse. We're going to get to that today. And then he's going to go into the body, and then an invitation at the end, where we understand that man has two choices: either fear God and keep his commandments. Those are the best two choices for man at the end of it all. So let me scan. I'm going to skip through this so we can get to where we left off. Here we go. Okay. This is a good summary slide here. So verses 1 through 11, again, to just recap a little bit, is like this first section of the introduction. And this is where the preacher, Solomon, has shown that there is a lot of meaningless repetition in life. We talked about how the sun rises and the sun sets, and he gave two other examples. You see if you guys remember what the other two examples were. Good. Yeah, the river's running into the ocean. We see that cycle, how the rivers continue to flow water out the ocean, but the ocean never fills up. Of course, we know about evaporative cycles, how this cycle can continue. And what's the other one? The wind. The wind goes to and fro without seemingly like no reason for it, but it never stops. It never goes in one direction. It just comes here and there, and it just seems like this meaningless thing in nature. And we talked about how the application, work, right? Work never ends. Work will be there all the time. It doesn't matter how much work you do. There's always more work coming to you. And when you die, someone else will have to do the work. And we're going to see that concept just play out through this here. And if that's the case, then man's life is basically meaningless. Just, of course, remember, Solomon is preaching this very pessimistic view for a purpose, for a reason. He's preaching this as a sermon and is purposely painting a negative picture, but it's from a secular view, okay? And we're going to get to the point eventually where he makes a transition to a godly view of life. So the next section, chapter 1, verse 12, we'll pick it up there. It says, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem. By the way, again, we talked about this last week. This is another evidence here that this is, in fact, Solomon. So he's talking about how, okay, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem. Verse 13, and I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven. It's a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. Right? So Solomon here is, I guess you could say, he's going to use his wisdom to sort out the details of life, and he's going to do this in a lot of different ways. So, as we know, what better person to seek this out, right? The wisest man ever. Seems appropriate that he would be the one to figure out the purpose of life. And in the first part, so in the section 2 of introduction, he's going to research through history. So we go look at verses 13 through 18. He's going to research history to go back and look and see what you can observe and what that tells him about life. Okay, and so One thing to note in verse 13, you'll see the word God. Keep that in mind. The word God that's used here in verse 13 is the first time that we see the word God used in this book. And we're not going to see that again until chapter 2, verse 24. Okay? So keep in mind, look at the context at which this is being used. All right? It says, "And I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven. It is a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with." So what's the context here in which Solomon is using the word God? What's he basically saying about what God has done here? Yeah.
God has put inquiry into our hearts. He's given us this striving to learn about things and to become more wise in this stages.
Yeah. Okay. And that last word is getting to it. Like the word used here is grievous, right? It's almost as if Solomon, again, remember he's taking the secular view, almost as if he's blaming God for the condition that man is in to have to do this grievous task, right? So again, he's used the word God, but in the context of it, it's not necessarily a positive way at this point, right? It's somewhat of a, oh man, this is what we're faced with as mankind. God has put us in this position, and we're going to have to go and figure this out. And then we also see here, if in verse 14, okay, "I have seen all the works which have been done under the sun," and there's that phrase again, under the sun, right? So everything, everywhere. "And behold, all is vanity and striving after wind." So this phrase, striving after wind, we'll see this multiple times. And that means it's basically ambition for the unattainable. No matter how much you try to grasp the wind, are you ever going to grasp the wind? It's not possible here, right? So it's like you're trying to grab something, you're never going to achieve it, okay? And so that's Solomon's conclusion, right? He's seen all the works which have been done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity. Everything is meaningless. And it's a waste of time. Don't bother trying to achieve it because you're not going to be able to obtain it, right? And then he's going to go through and talk about all the vain things, all the different kinds of vain things. And so we already see here in verse 14 one of those vain things, the works of men, right? In the verse 14, it talks about how he's seen all the works which have been done under the sun. So we see here that the works of men are vain, meaningless. And then I'm just going to list these out. We're going to get to the details there, but just so we can kind of prepare our thoughts and minds for where we're going to go with this, he's also going to show that pleasure is a vain thing. You can be absorbed in as much pleasure as you can, find, but at the end of it all, it's going to be unfulfilling. It's going to be vanity. Activities and labors in chapter 2, verse 11 and following, he's going to even go through that. All the hard work you put into your life, all the things that you do, all the, whether it's work or, things that you occupy your time with, meaningless, vain. Chapter 2, verse 15, knowledge, education, striving after wisdom. Now, I'm not here to say that Solomon's saying, hey, it's a waste of time to go to school. That's not at all what we're talking about here. But we'll get to what his point here is. But in general, again, you're continuing to strive endlessly for wisdom. That too is a meaningless pursuit. And then the focus on earthly accomplishments. In verse 21, chapter 2, 21, you can, focus on all sorts of goals, and you can achieve all the goals in the world, but at the end of it all, what have you actually accomplished? And I think we can look in those that, sports, for example, I'll just use that. But he's always comparing, how many championships has LeBron James won? How many championships has Michael Jordan won? And, it doesn't matter how high the number goes. It just seems like it's never enough. And if you ask those people, those sports stars, did they ever achieve everything that they want to do? Well, they might say they are, but why is it that then that they keep trying to compete the next year? It never ends. The desire to achieve more and more never goes away. So it becomes, again, this meaningless pursuit. Overemphasis on life and living, chapter 3, verse 19. We're going to see that is that, the more you focus on what's here under the sun, that's also vanity. Okay, and then let's see here. I think I don't want to do this. Let's see here. Yeah, I was just going to go ahead and populate this here. So the other thing that we're going to see here is sometimes we try to fix the world, right? We try to make things better. In verse 15, we're going to look at it says, what is crooked cannot be straightened, and what is lacking cannot be counted. No matter how hard you try to straighten out the world, there's just certain things you can't make right. And there's also this tendency for the world to, they make the right things wrong and the wrong things right. We see that happen over and over in time. And we can see that example of that if you go to Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20, the same thing, right? We call evil good and good evil, and we just see that pattern in life over and over again. And what he's going to find, so if we keep going here, verse 16, so just remind us all here, in verse 12, he's talking about, verse 13, he says, I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under the heaven. It's a grievous task. Verse 14, he's seen all the works that have been done of the sun. Behold, it's all vanity, striving after the wind. Verse 15, what is crooked cannot be straightened, and what is lacking cannot be counted. And then in verse 16, I said to myself, behold, I have magnified and increased wisdom more than all who were over Jerusalem before me. And my mind has observed a wealth of wisdom and knowledge. And I set my mind to know wisdom and to know madness and folly, and realize that this also is striving after the wind. Because in much wisdom there is much grief, and increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. Have you ever heard that phrase, ignorance is bliss? And isn't that true? It seems like the more that we try to learn about something, the more we try to gain wisdom, the more that you wish you hadn't tried to understand that. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure Adam and Eve are wishing they were still ignorant, right? Ignorance was bliss, truly, for Adam and Eve. Once they partook of that fruit, their whole world changed, and what they knew then, what they knew after that moment, they wish they hadn't known. And we see that happen in our lives, don't we? It seems like we always dream about going back to the good old days, or going back to the time that we were maybe a child, the innocence, right? You can't put the genie back in the bottle. Once you know this stuff, you can't unknow it. It's now there, and what a painful thing it is when you know the end result. And think about Solomon, the wisest man on earth, and so it makes sense why he's going through this. And the more that he investigates this stuff, the more pessimistic he is, and the more pain that he feels when he goes through this thing. And we see that, right? In verse 18, in much wisdom there is much grief, and increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. He wishes he hadn't even tried to go down this path. So knowledge is painful, ignorance is bliss. Okay. So he's going to now give us some more details about this research. Okay. So chapter 2, verses 1 through 11, Solomon is going to set out on doing a bunch of research. He's going to go through research through experiences and, he's already gone through research through history, and now he's going to go through research through experience. Okay, and in verse 3, we're going to get to verse 3 here, and that's what we're going to see here is the purpose of the book. So in chapter 2, verse 1, as I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure, so enjoy yourself. And behold, it too was futility. I said of laughter, it is madness, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine, while my mind was guiding me wisely, and how to take hold of folly until I could see what good there is for the sons of men to do under heaven the few years of their lives. So we see here, first of all, he's setting out on this research project. He's going to, he's not going to hold any part of himself back from enjoying pleasure. Okay, he's going to completely saturate his entire life with anything he can try to fulfill it with. And he's already given us the conclusion. He's going to say that it was futile. It was futility. And in verse 2, it says, I said of laughter, it is madness. Now the word here, laughter, is, and I'm going to butcher this, but it's the Hebrew word, it's like shok, which is like a superficial happiness, superficial gaiety. And if anybody knows the right way to pronounce it, let me know, because it was hard for me to figure that out. And then so I said of laughter, it is madness, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? And this word pleasure is it means simple satisfactions. And then he also explored why, and that also was vanity. So we can see here the purpose of the book. He's trying to figure out how to live your life in the few years of your life. I think that's important for us to recognize. We don't have much time on this earth. We have doesn't matter how long you live, it's still, in comparison to eternity, a short time. And doesn't it always feel like you blink and there goes 10 years? It's hard for me to imagine that, my daughter is 18 years old, and it just seems like yesterday she was, in a car seat in our car. And time just goes so fast. And it feels short, but it truly is short. And so if it's that short, how important is it that we figure out the purpose of life, right? We need to know what we're going to fill our lives with for this short period of time. And that's what Solomon's trying to do, right? He's going to try to figure this out. But so he tries to see if it's pleasure, and those things fail, those research projects fail. And he's also going to show that the work itself, we're going to get to that, he invests himself in work, and he's going to find that that's the one thing that he found enjoyable. But that too is also a problem, and we'll get to why in a little bit. But work was the only thing that he found to be worthwhile. He enjoyed the work. Okay, but the summary of it all from these research projects is that he was able to confirm the thesis that all was vanity. Okay, so chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, this idea of pleasure. He's consuming himself with pleasure, laughter, wine. These are the hedonistic endeavors, right? He's researching hedonistic endeavors. We talked about laughter. It's superficial gaiety. It was madness. And then pleasure, which is simple satisfactions, also accomplishes nothing. And then wine, we can see there, like it's interesting what it talks about here with the wine. And he makes a point to say that he kept himself under control throughout all these things, which, it's hard for me to comprehend, but he would try to maintain lucidity with this wine and try to, gain pleasure out of that. Anyway, that was hopeless. It was meaningless. And then we get to verse 4. And here's where his research projects are about his works. So in verse 4, I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. So those are the first two categories of works. We see houses. We see vineyards. Okay. Verse 5, I made gardens and parks for myself, and I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. So in verse 5, we see gardens and parks. Verse 6, I made ponds of water for myself, from which to irrigate a forest of growing trees. The ponds. All right. And then verse 7, I bought male and female slaves, and I had homeborn slaves. Also, I possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. Okay. And so we see slaves there. Verse 8, also I collected for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. And I provided for myself male and female singers and the pleasures of men, many concubines. Okay, so you see the things that he's doing, right? So he had livestock, silver and gold, and entertainers, and sensual pleasures. He left no stone unturned here, right? Houses, vineyards, gardens and parks, ponds, slaves, livestock, silver and gold, entertainers, sensual. This is a lot of. It's kind of funny, right? It's well, I don't know, it depends on your perspective, but it's ironic, I guess you'd say. It's a lot of work having fun. You might know some people like that. You ever met someone that they're, burning the candle at both ends? They work like crazy during the day, and then they don't ever go to bed, because after work, what do? They go out and they enjoy in some of these things, and they exhaust themselves. They just burn themselves out. And what happens, right? It's like, why are people driven to do that? Why do you think that is?
Find fulfillment in their life.
Yeah.
Right? Those are different things you do.
Right.
Yeah.
And do they ever achieve it?
No.
Yeah, we never wonder why they're burning the candle at both ends, because no matter how hard they try, it's driving after the wind. You're never going to attain it. And so it's interesting. We probably can look at our own lives and probably evaluate, where is it that we find ourselves doing the same kind of a thing, And here he is talking about not just about entertainment. He's talking about work. It's that too is something that, if we can continually find ourselves striving, and it's just striving after the wind. Again, you could say the same thing. Why are there workaholics? They're trying to find fulfillment in something, and yet they're never able to achieve it. And so Solomon, right, he leaves no stone unturned. He puts a lot of work into trying to find pleasure in all these things. And let's see here, verse 9. Then I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me. So that's an interesting. Sorry. Okay, yeah, all right. It's an interesting thing, right? He's making a point that he's maintaining his wisdom. He's trying to maintain his wisdom. He's trying to remain in control, because what's the most likely outcome when you invest yourself deeply into these kinds of things? I mean, is that a wise thing to do? Certainly not, right? And so you lose yourself in these things. It's not too hard to think, like, what happens if you pursue drink and wine? You're going to lose yourself. Yeah.
This is a step towards apostasy. This is where it's headed.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Of course, he is maintaining here that he's still in control, at least enough to realize that this is vanity, right? Yeah, it's true. That's true. And you have to, right? If you're going to pursue pleasure, that is the mindset that you have to have. And then, remember, he's still speaking from a secular view here. Remember, he's a preacher. He's preaching a sermon, and there's a purpose for where he's going with this. Let's see here. So verse 10, all that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. Okay, so what was Solomon's view of work here? What was his conclusion? Yeah. Yeah.
That's all that happens. I didn't accomplish anything else.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting too? I mean, I'm not sure if you've experienced this, but at least in my life, I've found that to be true, isn't it? Like, when you have too much time in your hand and you just got nothing to do, I mean, how enjoyable is that? I mean, that stinks. I don't like being bored, right? And then also, it seems like the times that we're most fulfilling is when we are maybe busy doing the work and in those moments. And I think that's what Solomon's trying to get to here is it's the work, right? It's the labor. There is some enjoyment in just being, doing the work. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We're after heavenly things is a totally different story. But we're after worldly things, none of that does us any good except keep them busy.
Right. Yeah. We're definitely getting there. So, I got to turn the page here. Here we go. Yeah.
He said, this was my reward. All this pleasure, all this excitement, this was my reward for all my hard work.
Yeah.
We're getting ready to take the trailer out and go up to the mountain and say, I deserve it. I worked hard this weekend.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
He's rationalizing.
Right.
He's
Right.
rationalizing the yeah, exactly. Yeah. This is because I've worked so hard for it. Work hard, play hard. We've heard that said a lot. Yeah.
I think he's also saying that he takes pleasure in a job well done, right?
Mhm.
We've used that expression, right? And we do,
Mhm.
right? We accomplish a task and it's done, and we say, man, it feels good. But what happens after that,
Right.
right? That's his point that he's getting at, right?
Yeah. So we should feel reward in the work that we do. But we're going to get here in verse 11. Verse 11 says, thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after the wind, and there was no profit under the sun. So once stopped working, there was no longer satisfaction. But yes, man should find reward in the work he does. Job well done. And we'll get to that more in a second. But the interesting question here is, there's another aspect of this. think about all this hard work that you do to, so in verse 11 it talks about how he's done all this great work and he's accomplished all these things, and yet it says there's no profit under the sun. So he's going to get into this. Let's see here.
Here I am, I work hard all week, I do all this stuff, we get the weekend and I deserve it, and I go,
Yeah.
then I go home and go back to work, and it all goes
Yeah.
back into the cycle.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, but he says it's vanity, but there is actually a biblical perspective to consider here. How does, is it wrong? First of all, is it wrong to have enjoyment in the work that you do? No, and in fact, it's an important part of our lives. So if we go to Philippians chapter 4, verse 14. All right. Philippians 4:14. Who can read that for us?
Nevertheless, you have done well to share with me in my affliction.
Okay. So, I don't think that's the verse I was looking for. Oh, Philippians 4:13. Well, no, yeah, I think I've got the scripture wrong. My apologies. And I'll have to go back and look at my notes. But there is, it's expected. We should have joy in the work that we do. Yeah. But what's the difference? Have you ever met someone who hates their job? And then you met some people that love their job? And it might be the same job. It might be the same exact job that two people do, and one person is enjoying it and one person's not enjoying it. And what's the difference? The work's the same, but what's the difference? It's your attitude, right? Your attitude about it. And I guess the one thing to think about here is how important is it that is it about the work that we do, or is it about the attitude about that work? And I know that you could probably look at some kind of work where it's really horrible, but think about the attitude that, you can look at how Paul, in when he's in prison, what his attitude was there. Even though he's going through some hardships, right? What was his attitude, right? He was joyous at being in prison. And so I don't think any of us have jobs that are actually in prison. I know sometimes we joke about that. Oh man, my boss, he's a slave driver, Oh man, this is such a hard job, and just going to the salt mines. We have this mindset. We get ourselves in this mindset of, man, my job is horrible, but yet someone else is able to find the joy in doing the work. And so just one thing to think about is, if you're in a job that you're miserable at doing, maybe ask yourself, is it the job that's the issue, or could it be the attitude that I have about that work? Because you can find people, it doesn't matter what job they're doing, they'll find ways to have joy in that work that they're doing. If Paul could find joy being in prison, we might just be able to find joy in anything that we have to deal with in our life, including that horrible job that we might have. So where are we at? Chapter 2, verse 11. We just finished chapter 2, verse 11, right? Verse 12. Okay, so chapter 2, verse 12 to 23 is the final section of the introduction. And the focus here is, again, digging more into discouragement. So in verse 12, it says, "So I turn to consider wisdom, madness, and folly. For what will the man do who will come after the king except what has already been done. Interesting. What do you think Solomon had in mind with this verse? I turn to consider wisdom, madness, and folly. For what will the man do who will come after the king, except what has already been done? Okay. True. And who was to come after Solomon? Who was Solomon's son? Rehoboam. What did he do?
Is he the one that went north? Or
Oh man, you're breaking out a Sean Hawkworth question there. I don't remember. Well, I can tell you this. I mean, he wasn't a good king. He squandered his dad's wealth, and I think it was less than probably a year's time frame. Had squandered it all, and so think about Solomon, right? Here he's worked so hard for everything, and who's he leaving it to, right? So we can see an example. Solomon's living this example of what happens when you leave your wisdom. We're actually going to get to that. I'm sorry, I think I jumped the gun on that one, but in verse 19, we'll get to that in verse 19 actually. But see, in verse 13. Sorry, this is a summary. Okay, so in this section, there's a bunch of discouragement because he's not able to find the reason or find the answer. You realize that wisdom has no discernible advantage. So in let's keep reading through 13 through 16. And I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I know that one fate befalls them both. Then I said to myself, as is the fate of the fool, it will also befall me. Why then have I been extremely wise? So I said to myself, this too is vanity. For there is no lasting remembrance of the wise man as with the fool, inasmuch as in the coming days all will be forgotten, and how the wise man and the fool alike die. And so Solomon realizes that it doesn't matter how wise you are. You look at the wise man and the fool, is the end result any different? Yeah? Yes.
Prayer looks like without God.
Exactly.
Later, you have a different attitude. You're working for the future.
Mm-hmm.
Totally different.
Exactly. Yeah. Again, just keep our secular mindset. Again, he's going down this rabbit hole real hard, and that's the thing. Is it's really important for us to really grasp how depressing and hopeless it is in this chapter 1 verse 1 through chapter 2 verse 23 without God. Right? Without God, things are hopeless. And so we can see here in verse 17 through 23, so I hated life, for the work which had been done under the sun was grievous to me, because everything is futility and striving after wind. Thus I hated all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored under the sun, for I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And that's right there where I was going after, is that reference there to Rehoboam. And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool, yet he will have control over all the fruit of my labor for which I have labored by acting wisely under the sun. This too is vanity. So we can see here that the fruit of the labor will be left to someone else. And think about that. An inheritance, right? We think about, who are we going to leave our inheritance to when we die? Maybe you feel like Solomon, and maybe you're going to end up leaving your wealth to someone that doesn't know anything about the hard work that you put into it, has no experience, or maybe doesn't have the wisdom or the work ethic. And what's going to happen? When you leave it to someone who's in that position, is that going to have a good result? And how do you feel about that? So you can see how Solomon is feeling like, it doesn't matter how much I work for this stuff. I'm just going to be leaving it to someone who, is going to not appreciate it. It's not going to, keep it going. It's all going to go to waste. And, so that's the same kind of a thought that we have. And so you have to think about that. Who are you going to leave? When you die, everything that you got is going to end up with someone else. Who is it going to be? And so Solomon was struggling with this as well. So going back, just to kind of pick this section apart, he's going through several of these vain things. Okay, so in verse 13, we see that the vain thing here is profit from one's labor. And in verse 13, going back, and it says, I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I know that one fate befalls them both. And so he looks at how wisdom is of value, but is not the solution to everything in verse 13. Wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. Like we all understand the concept that light always wins out, right? How long does darkness last? But not even a millisecond once light is present. And so wisdom is always better than folly. But in verse 14, it says, the wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet, I know that one fate befalls them both. So even though wisdom is better, what's the result? It's the same result for both the wise man and the fool. So wisdom is of value, but it's not the solution to everything. Wisdom is a lamp to one's path, but when we see this concept of the fool. Now here's the question. What's a fool? And we can also look to Solomon's words in the Proverbs, and we could see that the fool is one who's unteachable. We all are human, we all make mistakes, but what's the difference between a fool and someone who's wise? They learn, right? Yeah, we learn from our mistakes. We don't repeat them. And so what is it that are we then when we continue to repeat our mistakes? And we can see we can take that to sin, right? We can look at this understanding of a fool, right? We don't want to be someone that repeats our mistakes. We want to learn. We want to be wise. But the idea of the word fool here is talking about someone who is unteachable. Okay. And then verse 16. Okay. Verse 16 here is vain thing number 4. And this is the quest for wisdom. And here it says, in verse 17, I hated life, for the work which had been done under the sun was grievous to me, because everything is futility and striving after wind. We talked about this idea of how the more you know, the more pain you go through, and ignorance is bliss. The secular view, though, is that from all this stuff that we're going through, that Solomon is saying, I hate life. This is just, it's too meaningless. And then in verse 19, we skip down to verse 19. It talks about, again, the fruit of our labor might be left to a fool. And we can look at Rehoboam as the example of that for Solomon. But 1 Corinthians 15:58. Let's see. Who can read that for us? 1 Corinthians 15:58.
Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your toil is not in vain in the Lord.
Interesting. And there we go. We're starting to see this again. Reminder that without God, all right, our work is meaningless. It's vain. But in the Lord, that same work and the work of the Lord, the right kind of work, and the work done with the right purpose and the right focus has value. And then in verse 21, focus on earthly accomplishments is the vain thing number 5. In verse 21, it says, when there is a man who has labored with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, then he gives his legacy to one who has not labored with them. This too is vanity and a great evil. Again, we talked about this idea. No matter how much you build up, you're just going to end up leaving it to someone else. And in fact, it's even, you think about it, it's really unfair, isn't it? You work so hard for everything you've done in this planet, under the sun, and you're just going to give it to someone who didn't work for it, didn't earn it, doesn't deserve it, doesn't appreciate it, you know? And so, yeah, again, we have to think about that for our own lives. So, summary of this whole section. Why did Solomon despair about life? This is nothing more than just another generation. The sun rises, the sun sets, the water flows from the rivers to the ocean, and it just never fills up. And we see the cycles of the wind, and it's just, again, we see it's just another generation. We're going to die, and then there's going to be someone that comes up, and they're going to die, and it's just this lots of meaningless repetition, just over and over. Everyone's going to be forgotten. I mean, if you ever walk through a graveyard or a cemetery, and you look through the gravestones, and you read, just stop at one, you'll read what's on there, and you're like, oh, it'll put the person's name and maybe the years, and then maybe there might be something that describes what they had done, and you might stop and ponder what that like that person, who that person was. But then, that moment will pass, and you move on to, like, maybe you look at another gravestone, and so on, and that's the extent of, that's probably, the extent of the end of all of our lives. No one's going to remember who we were. Maybe for one generation there might be some remembrance of who you were, but that generation will then die, and that memory will be gone, and so everyone will be forgotten. And the other thing he's despairing about is that no one knows the meaning of life. Even after all his pursuits, from a secular point of view, there is no meaning to life. Again, from the secular view, without God, no meaning to life. Wisdom doesn't give you any advantage. You're still going to die, and works will be left to one who won't appreciate it. So pessimistic, so despairing to read this. But then we get to a major shift in this whole thing, and thankfully, we get to end here. Let's look at verse 24. Okay, it says, there is nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. This also I have seen, that it is from the hand of God. What a change. He spent the first two chapters just painting this horrible picture, and then he introduces God into the picture for the first time. And everything changes. The same work that was considered meaningless and just depressing, and now it says, there's nothing better for man than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. What a different perspective, isn't it? So remember, up until now, God has been missing, and now he wants to show that with God, everything is good and beautiful. And we're going to see that pop through the text here. We're going to see him emphasize that life is good, that life is a gift given by God, that life is full of pleasures from God. The same things that he just got done talking about how depressing and horrible and just repetitious they are, he's now going to go back and say, but with the right context, the right view, life is beautiful. Life is great. And with God, we can see that life is enjoyable, that it is beautiful, that God has given us gifts. Life is stable. That same depressing thing about the sun going up and down, if you're with the right perspective, that gives you, peace, doesn't it? To know that God is in control. That that with God, life has purpose, that life has joy. Yes, we're going to go through some hardships, but again, remember, we talk about Paul being in prison, finding joy. There is joy in life with God, no matter what our life is like. And so this really is a turning point. We see that this is the first time God is referenced, except for 113. We talk about that, where he's blaming, basically from a secular view, blaming God for the grievous task left to man. We see that this is a turning against the series of faulty conclusions which are only true with God. And by the way, there are arguments in the secular world about this being a turning point. So these are just, again, supporting information here for you, just to have confidence that that's the way that this is structured, that you can really understand that this truly is not a pessimistic book. This is really an optimistic book here. And the three reasons that this is a turning point. Again, God is only mentioned once up to this point. He had a very negative view of wisdom and its worth, and his view of various aspects of life, history, and creation have been very pessimistic, and that all changes after this. The revised thesis, remember the thesis of the beginning was everything was vanity, and now with God, all is not vanity. And so we're going to put a pin in it here for now. Yes?
Entered my mind. Remind me, fear God and keep His commandments rather than enjoy the sins for a season.
Right.
And that kind of binds to the study that we've done tonight.
That's right. That's exactly the end of it all, right? Right at the end of this book, that's the conclusion. And he's taking a while to get there, right? So yeah, we know that's the cool thing, right? We know where this is all headed. And what a great, I think it's encouraging. Every time we get discouraged in life, as we go through this study, hopefully this will build, this book will become something you can now use in your arsenal. Like when you get discouraged with the stuff that's going on in life, Ecclesiastes is such a great reminder of just how beautiful life is. And it's a matter of perspective. If we are seeing our lives as, depressing, maybe we go back to this book and see what Solomon has to say. Cool. All right, let's close the word of prayer. I'll let y'all go. Father in heaven, we're just so grateful that you are in control, that you have blessed us with a beautiful life. We pray, Lord, that we would remember all the great, this beautiful life that you've given us, that if we have the right perspective, that this life is just an amazing blessing. So, Lord, we pray that we find ourselves in a funk, we're getting down on life, or we're pessimistic and feeling hopeless, that we would seek your word for guidance, for encouragement. We would not try to invest ourselves deeper into the rabbit hole of the world, trying to find pleasure outside of you, Lord, but that we would remember that the only joy can be found in you. The only beautiful life can be found in you. And again, we're so grateful that we had the opportunity tonight to be together. And we pray that you would watch over us, keep us safe, and help us return to the next appointed time, that we may once again be together as your body, to worship you and to learn more about you and to grow closer to you. And we pray these things in your Son's name. Amen.